Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to talk about functions and how to program them. So, what is a function? Well, int main is actually a function this whole time we've been using it. It's the main function that the program starts into whenever it starts up. So, we want to be able to call other functions from the int main function, and you can even call other functions from inside of those. But what is the purpose of a function? Well, it's to return a value, basically, or to modify a value. It should be either one of those two things. Ideally, it should not be both. So the structure of a function is like this. You've got your name, which can be anything you want, unless it's the main function, then it has to be main. Then you got parameters. You can deal with those. You can decide whether you want to have parameters or not, depending on your needs for your function. This one does not have any because it doesn't need any. And then the return type. Again, you'll specify a return type based on what you need it to do. And in this case, we're returning an integer. And the return type has to match. So if I return a 0, that's an int. If I return a 1 or a 2, that's an int. Or a -2, that's also an int. But if I want to return like an x, well, that's not an int. That's a character. So, you want to make sure that these match. And if you ever want to change the type to like, you can use any type that you can think of, like a string or a type that you made yourself, but they have to match. So, alrighty. So, let's go over how to make a new function, because I'm going to show you how to make a new one, and then we're gonna show how to call a function and how to sort of combine everything we've learned together into like a really complicated function. That's actually going to be pretty useful in a practical sense, kind of. So, if I want to make another function that gets called inside of main, we'll just call it void, my function. And void means that you don't need to return anything. So you can just call void my function, and we don't even need to return any sort of value here. Now, what we can try to do, or what we will do here is we'll just do an output statement called my function. So that is just going to let us know that this was successful, basically. In order to call this inside of main, it's really simple. All you got to do is just type the name of the function and then put those parentheses there. And if you had any parameters that you wanted to put into the function, we'll get to that later when you do, but you would put them in that parentheses spot. So you can just leave that empty for right now. And now you'll see that there is an error here, and that is because of C++. Some languages allow you to define a function after you call it, but C++ needs to know what it is beforehand, because you can see down here we've got our error. It says identifier not found. So it doesn't know what my function is referring to. It's trying to identify it, but it can't, because the compiler reads this from top to bottom, and when it's reading it, it's going okay, 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 and then it's like, my function, well, where's that? My function isn't a thing, so it just can't compile it. So one solution is to bump it up there, and that'll work. See, because now it knows what it is. But if we want to keep our function at the bottom of the code, depending on our preferences for doing this, we can then, well, this becomes important later, so you'll want to know how to do this, but we'll want to declare the function ahead of time. So we'll call it void my function, like that. And really, you'll notice that this is basically identical to this part right here, although it won't always be 100% identical, because there's a few exceptions to that, but generally it's pretty identical to that first line, which is called the function signature. So because that's how you identify different functions from each other, is that signature line. So just to clarify, this is the definition. I'll call it the function definition. And this is the function declaration. Okay, so you might see this in Visual Studio. If you right click right here, you'll see peak definition, go to definition, and go to declaration. That's what that means. That's what it's referring to. If I go to definition, it takes me down here to where the definition is. If I go to the declaration, it takes me up there to where the declaration is. And if I decide to peek at the definition, it opens up a little window for me to inspect it. And that's useful if you're working with multiple files and you don't want to actually switch out of the file just to see the definition of it. Okay. So now I've got a little bit more of a project for us to look at here. So I'm gonna let's deal with a practical sort of example of this that really explores what you can do with the function. Because there are certain things, there are certain reasons to use a function over other types of doing things. The biggest one is to prevent yourself from typing the same code over and over and over. And the other reason would be to allow for variation in using the same underlying logic. So if you notice that you're repeating if you're repeating a lot of lines of code, lots of code that does the same thing, the first thing you might try and check is see if you can use a for loop or a while loop. But then if there's more complicated stuff than just that, then you'll realize maybe I can put this inside of a function. So you'll see what I mean in just a second here. I'm going to create a function called, let's just get rid of these right now because we don't need them anymore. Let's declare a function called std string. This is going to give us a string. Create secret code. And we're just going to keep it like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to just do a std cout, create secret code, std and l. So you can just basically put this in place of a variable. And so this function is returning a string. So as far as cout is concerned, this is just a string. Okay, so again, this is this is where you would put that. Also, I forgot to mention this before, but like, you see this button right here, you can collapse a function like that. So whenever, I'll show this off in a second here. I fill out this part of it. Create secret code. So this is the skeleton of our definition here. You can just close these out. And so if you have a lot of functions, you can close those out. But sort of a neat idea to conceptualize this is like, you don't really need to know what's going on necessarily. I mean, if you do, then you just peek inside of it like that. But if you're looking at code like this, you can sort of get an idea based on the name of the function, what it should be doing. And so a really well-named function will be very descriptive in what it's talking about right here. So we know that we're creating a secret code. Like if you called it like secret code, like I don't know what that means. Like, is it creating one? Is it reading one? Is it, what's it doing? Or what if we just call it sc? Like that's a bad name. That's a really bad name for a function because I don't know what that means. So that's something to keep in mind. Be descriptive with your function names. And generally, you want to make sure that a function only does one thing, basically. It's either going to, yeah, well, I don't want to get too deep into that, but keep it simple. Okay, so we've got our function declaration and definition here. And all we're going to do is output the secret code that we're going to make. Okay, it's sort of simple, but so we'll do std string code equals empty string, and then we'll return that code. So far we're not doing anything too out of the ordinary. Now, how is our code going to operate? Well, I'm just making this up just for the sake of an example, but we could have a character x. Again, this is not the best descriptor, but we'll say x is going to be 0, and then character y is going to be 1. So we're sort of making like a binary code here. And then we're just going to say, just go along with this for a second, int number of digits equals 8, and for int I equals 0, I is less than number of digits, I plus plus. Remember this from the for loop lesson. So what we're doing is we're going through all of the digits that we're going to have, and we're going to either put a 1 or a 0 there. And in order to make that happen, we're going to do an if statement. If I mod 2 equals 0. So this is a special condition that might come up a lot. You might see this often. If something is can be modded by 2, that's another way for saying that that it's even number. Because anything that is divisible by 2 and has no remainder, which is what this is saying, divisible by 2 has no remainder, that's an even number. Otherwise, it's an odd number. So we're just going to say that our code, we're going to add the x here. Otherwise, we're going to add the y here. Okay. Now, it's also important to know, that a string is just a series of characters. I think I covered this before. So we know that we can add characters to a string, and that's going to work. So we'll eventually come out here with a code that is composed of zeros and ones to the length of the number of digits. Okay? So, and it's going to output it right there. So again, just for the control flow of how this works, the program is going to enter on main, and it's going to call cout, and it's going to go in here, and then when it goes in here, it'll generate this code, return that code back up out here, print out that code, and then print the inline, and then return. And the program will be finished. So there we go. So it has been completed. Okay. All right. So in the next video, I'm going to modify this a little bit, and we'll go into a little bit of a deeper understanding of how functions work. We'll go into parameters, passing stuff in and out, and a few more complicated things that we can do. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.